everyone. This is Julia McNamara of the Global Executive, and we're doing our lunchtime learning series, our virtual cafe talks. And today we have Stephanie Silverman, who is a world-renowned public speaking coach and an advisor to many Fortune 100 companies. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and Stephanie is going to talk to us today about her expertise and also give us tips and real life examples of managing our anxiety when we're doing something new, when we're presenting, or also some tips for going through our tough times right now. Stephanie, thank you so much. We really welcome having you today.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I think this is a time that's challenging all of us to dig deep and try to remain calm and at the same time be vigilant. It's a lot to manage, and in the midst of all of that, we're thrust into less familiar working environments, working from home, juggling, raising children. There's just a lot going on. So a spike in anxiety is to be expected, and having some techniques and tools at the ready can be very useful. And some of these are things that you could even share with other members of your family, even children, to get control again. Control is sort of a strong word, but to return your body to a neutral state. So maybe it would be helpful for me to start broad and talk about what we're dealing with now, just as a culture, and the level of stress and anxiety that that's producing. And I think that some important things to consider as we try to keep ourselves together through all of this is to filter the information that we're receiving, first of all, because there is so much information available right now, and not all of it is reliable, and not all of it is written with a tone that is easy to receive. So we all choose different sources that we consider to be reliable, but I think right now most people would agree that when it comes to what's happening with this particular virus, the CDC, the World Health Organization, and Health and Human Services are the best sources for information. And anything else that people, while well-intended, may be passing around may not be accurate. So it's important to trust the source from which you are receiving information and keep things clear, and share with your kids, obviously, only that which they need to know in order to remain safe. I think once we know what we're dealing with, which is something that's changing a little bit from day to day, it's important to take care of ourselves. And that's not something we do very well. So this sort of dovetails into another recommendation, which I'm sure you're all hearing, which is to try to create some sort of schedule, not to let everything go and become a free-floating organism, but rather try to wake up around the same time. Try to do a little something that gets your body moving. Try to take that 15-minute break several times throughout the day to center yourself, to get a cup of tea, I have a relaxation exercise that I shared with everyone, and maybe we can put that in with this information so that people can use that. I use it even though it's my own recording and my own voice, because it just clears out everything that is stressful and allows you to get back to good, healthy breath. And then the last thing that I would suggest in a general sense has to do with focusing on other people. We all have legitimate concerns right now and fears for ourselves and maybe for our family members, but thinking bigger about the community and ways in which we can contribute. And it doesn't have to be financial, and it doesn't have to be sewing masks. It could also just be making time to have a Zoom meeting with a friend, doing a virtual happy hour, reaching out to other people and connecting, because sometimes the instinct is to become insular. I'm a bit of an introvert by nature. Many people don't know that about me. And it's very easy for me to retreat into my own space, and it becomes a little bit unhealthy for me. So I have to actively engage with other people, and that helps to reduce my stress. It takes my mind off of my own concerns and puts me in a helping mindset, which is always where we're kind of at our best. So those are some broad suggestions in terms of managing the anxiety. The breathing exercise is really one that's that's practical, that you can use at any time. And I can shift now to relaxation when it comes to public speaking specifically, which is my area of focus. This is a stressful thing to do, and sometimes just being on video conference can be stressful for people who are typically not comfortable seeing themselves on camera. So it can happen even in a meeting that you have scheduled, where suddenly you're presented with your own reflection on video, and it's distracting and challenging. So I'd like to give you a couple of suggestions of how to manage your anxiety before a presentation. And I want to divide it into two categories. One is what you can do well in advance of the event, and the other are things that you can do directly before you're going to be presenting. So starting back when you're preparing, being thoughtful about your preparation in a very specific way can already put in place some aspects that will reduce anxiety. One of those things that you can put in place from the very beginning is asking yourself a simple question like, what would a successful outcome from this exchange look like to my listener? So if I'm going to be giving a report to internal stakeholders in my company, I might ask, what's in it for them to be here? What information would be considered really valuable to them? And how might they be able to act on the information that I'm giving them if I'm successful in its delivery? If I'm talking to a larger group externally, then the question is, why are they here? What are they hoping to get out of this? How will success show up for them? And let that be my guiding principle throughout my preparation, so that I'm always honoring why my audience is there as the top priority.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always focused on providing value for the time that they're investing. One thing I've learned about confidence, which is a kind of a mystery that people are always trying to solve, is that confidence really comes when you know that what you're offering people has value. If you feel like you've been thoughtful in how you put it together and you want it to be valuable to those listening, then you don't feel too uncomfortable about sharing it, because you know it's going to be beneficial to them to hear it. Even if it's bad news, sometimes that means that they'll be armed with the information they need in order to make the right decisions to mitigate negative outcomes. So the second thing that you can do in advance is practice deliberately. And what I mean by that is, rather than going over and over a presentation again and again with the hope of general improvement, you take the approach that the athlete takes, which is not playing a mock game over and over again, hoping all aspects of the game improve, but rather identifying specific targeted areas that need work. Like, maybe I have a tendency to talk too fast when I'm nervous. So I want to dedicate some practice to just slowing down and taking meaningful pauses. I can use a video camera, and that way I can present without thinking about it too much, like not with a mirror, which gives you immediate feedback, but a video camera, which allows you to do your thing, then review it, assess, see how you do, give yourself another chance to try it again. And deliberate practice is a term that was coined by Anders Ericsson, who's an economist, and he has determined that this is the way that people become expert at anything, really, music or any skill. And it's just, when you think about batting practice, they're not playing the whole game, they're just working on batting. So practice in front of a camera, identify your challenge areas, isolate one, practice with that for a little while and get better at that, then move on to the next one. And in this way, you'll really move the needle and be able to see improvement, rather than just hoping that by familiarity and repetition, it gets better. The secondary gain is that you will also become more familiar with your material, because you'll be practicing it as you work on those skills. So I want to pause now and just see if you have any questions, Julia, before I move on to the just before presenting section.
No, I love this. And I love this idea of deliberate practice. I've never heard it called that. And I completely agree that I just love the analogy that you gave. I think this idea of identifying areas to work on and then practicing them, relentlessly is just really interesting. I really like the way you've explained that.
Great. Well, and it's funny, because once you hear it, it makes perfect sense, but it's not necessarily intuitive to apply it. And what I like about it is you can measure success. You can see growth much more easily than if you're just working on everything all together and trying to identify, is it getting better or isn't it? This is a way of locking in on those specific things and being a little bit less sensitive around the challenge areas and more strategic. That's the real goal, is to not feel like, oh, I'm not good at this, so I hope I can get away with it. My
Yeah.
body language is stiff. I hope it doesn't look stiff. Well, don't just hope. Focus on the body language and practice under various circumstances. Is this too much? Maybe it is. Maybe I need to tone it down. Let me go through a couple slides and see what's within the realm of possibility for me and how I can get comfortable and natural with it. So that's been a real game changer for a lot of my clients. Sometimes you can do everything right. You have it all in place. You've been really thoughtful about how you prepare and the goals and strategies that you put in place, but you still get anxious because speaking in front of a group is unusual and it feels strange when everybody's looking at you and you have to perform. So there are a few things that you can do just ahead of a presentation that can be very helpful. One thing is, if you do the relaxation exercise that I've shared and you do that on a regular basis, getting your breath steady becomes much easier when you need it. You don't have to go through the whole 15-minute exercise. Your body already is conditioned now to know what it feels like to breathe in a relaxed manner. And so you can just be thoughtful and sit in a chair, close your eyes, and get yourself focused in that way. But there are other breathing exercises that you can do that are immediate. One of them is a little bit tricky to explain, but it involves counting your breath. So you're judging, if you're feeling nervous, your breath starts to get shallow and you start to breathe more quickly, your heart rate starts to go up. And all of these things tend to snowball if you don't know how to recalibrate. So once you feel those feelings start to kick in, you use your fingers and you count. About how many counts does it take for me to take a normal inhale of breath? How many for the exhale? So I'll just demonstrate. So right now it's not very, very deep. 3 in, 3 out without straining. You focus your attention in the moments before you have to go up, just seeing if you can gently add a single count for each cycle of breath. So if I started with 3, the next time I try for 4. And I do it sort of over my teeth so that it doesn't all come out at once. And in this way, you concentrate, you stay calm, and you try not to suck in air, but keep the breath at a natural pace. If you can't add one, you just stick with the same number until you come around to the next cycle of breath, and then see if you can add one. And this does a couple of things. One is it naturally makes your breath slower, which also slows your heart rate and calms your whole autonomic nervous system. But it also gives you something very specific to focus on. So all the racing thoughts that may be causing some of the anxiety get focused into this exercise where you have to keep track of count and keep track of how you're breathing. And pretty soon you will find sometimes you can double the count. And once you're done with that, you have settled your nerves to a point where they are now going to serve you as opposed to take you off course. A little side note about that is I think it's important to feel a little bit nervous, just a little bit. What that tells you is that you care about the outcome. If you're completely relaxed, completely at ease, don't really have any skin in the game, then how much value are you really creating for your audience? I rather feel a little bit nervous because I want it to go well, because it matters to me. So I've become friends with that little bit of nervousness, and I look forward to feeling it because that tells me I care. And it also gives me a little bit of a boost of energy that is required to hold the attention of a group of people. When you're speaking one-on-one, you can be very, very relaxed, but you don't want to have that level of relaxation when you're trying to hold the attention of a group. So a little anxiety can be very helpful, but if it starts to feel like it's getting out of control, then you want to pull it in with a breathing exercise. In addition to breathing, another thing that's really important is assuming that you have a very clear purpose for this presentation and you have the value to the other clearly in mind. as your mind starts to drift to the critic and the concerns of how people will view you and judge you, you can bring your thoughts back to this purposeful idea. My
Mhm.
purpose today in talking to you is to try to provide some helpful tips to people who may feel like their anxiety is getting the better of them. I want to look good, of course. I want this to reflect well on me. But if I focus on that, I'm going to be much more self-absorbed and self-conscious. Rather, if I think about everybody who might be listening and what people might be able to benefit from hearing the message, I have a better shot of giving a good representation of what I can do and show myself in the best light. And I believe too that if I make an error, have a hiccup, don't look perfect, that people will forgive me and still see me as someone who brings value to the relationship, as
Mhm.
opposed to someone who doesn't make a mistake, but also doesn't offer anything anybody really wants or needs. So, so it's that commitment to value, that redirecting your thoughts. You know, it's like any meditation. Your thoughts are going to wander. You're going to have moments of self-consciousness, but to know where to bring your thoughts back to, that touchstone of why are we here? What's in it for them? How can I deliver on this value that can calm your nerves enough that you can carry on and still deliver on the promise? So those are some of the things that I use on a regular basis, and I'm not immune to getting nervous, but these things I find have a way of becoming a reliable back stopgap measure against things getting out of control. I guess I can add one more thing, and that has to do with eye contact, which is interesting in this forum because sometimes you have it and sometimes you don't. I don't have it with anyone right now. I'm looking at myself and at this little black dot on my laptop. But when people are looking at you and you can see them looking at you, that can be a little bit unnerving. And one recommendation that I give to my clients is to, rather than feel like the object of everyone's scrutiny, I choose to think of myself as a camera. And a
Mm.
camera is collecting data and information from each person who's listening and making little focus adaptations based on the information that's coming in. So if I'm looking around the room and I'm really looking at you, I'm not really thinking about what you're looking at. I can say, okay, she's on board. She's nodding to me right now. He looks a little confused. Maybe I need to rephrase that point. And I'm working off of what I'm seeing, then I'm too busy to be too self-conscious. I'm actively engaged in responding to what my camera is picking up around the room. So that's just a little tip on a delivery technique. But that's kind of what I put together. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
No, it's wonderful. I think that's fantastic. I love this idea. So there's several gems that you've had in there, but I love this idea of pretending you're the camera. I've never heard that ever. And I think it's really useful. I'm so glad that you addressed this idea of being looked at, because I do think people feel when they present that can cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of, yeah, nervousness, even in people that have a lot of experience. And I agree with you also that it's hard to present to a camera. It is good to sort of read the audience and get the feedback of the audience. Like you said, be able to look at the people in the front row, for example, if you were in a crowd or speaking to a crowd, and kind of get their body language and get some feedback about what topics you should explain more. How are people receiving the information that you're saying? So I love that. And I do like this idea of, I think you've given some excellent tips. And I think this particular tip about pretending you're a camera is just really genius. I think it's really great.
Thank
I'm
you.
chuckling because I think it's so good. And I love this idea of using the imagination, and you distract yourself, and you can also, I think it's a really kind of very solid exercise that anyone could use. um, and I do think, again, that I like that you picked up on that point about people. A lot of people don't like to be looked at. And earlier you mentioned also, I'm also surprised by a lot of people that practice and then say, I'll just get up there and wing it. I practiced a few times. I love this idea of breaking it down, as you mentioned, like an athlete, focusing on the areas where you need particular improvement and zeroing in on that. So I do like that. I believe just incessantly kind of practicing your speech over and over, which a lot of people do, is not the right approach, as you pointed out. So I think that was an excellent explanation.
Thank you. It's hard to know when to stop too. If you're just going over it again and again, when is enough enough? And it's very hard to judge.
I also feel that if you just memorize it and then you get interrupted or you lose your place, I feel that people get completely derailed if they just memorize.
That's true. We could talk for hours on that subject alone. I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of these points, and I don't recommend that people memorize for that and many other reasons, not the least of which is that we write very differently than we speak, and that's part of why people come across as stilted when they work off of a written script. Unless you're really skilled at it, it sounds canned and weird.
No,
So
exactly. And we'd love to have you back. So the purpose of this was sort of a short intro. So I love the topics that you've covered. I love the real life advice and the tips that you've given us. So thank you for that. And can Stephanie please give us one more? Where can our audience reach you if they need help?
Oh,
Kind of
yes, thank you. My
presenting.
website is silvermanspeechcoach.com. Silvermanspeechcoach.com.
Okay. Well, thank
Great.
you so much, Stephanie. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate having you.
It's been a pleasure. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. You take care.
Thank you. You too. Stay safe.
Thanks again. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.